Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast brought to you by Renthal Street. Check out renthal.com for handlebars, chains, sprockets and lots of other parts for your motorbikes. On today's podcast, we've got our usual midweek Patreon special where we take our questions and answers from all of our patrons on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. As ever, we're on YouTube as well. So if you're watching us on YouTube, David's going to give you a big smile with his new teeth. And if you like that, like and subscribe to the Paddock Pass podcast on YouTube. David, I did mention about your teeth there. You've managed to get to the dentist. All of your woes from last weekend are behind you now.
They are, and it's not a new tooth. It's the same one. They just stuck it back with some glue. And when I was sitting there, I was reminded that so much of dentistry is engineering. It's about sort of composites and adhesives and all sorts of other things. You know, it's. I mean, I won't say I enjoy going to the dentist, but it is quite fascinating just in terms of material technology.
Yeah, I am not the least bit surprised that contrarian Emmett likes to go to the dentist, the only man in the world. Dave, one person that isn't contrarian was Miriam. We had a message in from Miriam. She was one of our winners from the Silverstone competition, and she had a great experience, and I know it meant a lot for you and for all of us on the team whenever we got a message from her just saying how much fun she had at the British Grand Prix.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, it's great. It's great to see people like really enjoying it. And she was out there doing the righteous work of converting F1 fans into MotoGP fans. So yeah, no, good on her.
Better than doing God's work. And Neil Morrison, a man with a voice of God, I'm sure. Really, you're back in Barcelona after the Aragon Grand Prix, getting ready for Misano. It's non-stop for you at the minute.
It is, Steve. Yeah, we're entering into that crunch time of the year when, you don't really have a day free to yourself. Moto E finale coming up this weekend as well, so 4 classes to cover. But we've got some rain in Barcelona, which is the first time in about 2 months. So, it is a little bit like that Shawshank Redemption scene where I'm leaning down on my balcony, just feeling the precipitation coming down. So, it's all good here.
Neil waded through 4 football fields of shit to get us onto the Paddock Pass podcast this week. But Neil, just a bit of news just came in as well about David Alonso for Moto2 next year, stepping up with the Aspar team. No big surprise with that, obviously.
Yeah, the world's most unsurprising news, I think. Is it really worth talking about? Because it was a given about 3-4 months ago, I would say. But I think it makes sense for all parties, definitely. And no more deserving promotion, I think there is in the entire paddock.
We had a last minute question as well, Neil, actually about the Moto2 rider market, and Adrian Huerta has been linked with the Italtrans seat. And Huerta's, he's obviously got Pirelli experience from his 300s and his Supersport days. Looks like he's on course to win the Supersport World Championship this year. So not a big surprise to see him being half linked with a switch to Moto2, but to see a specific team come in for him, that probably is a little bit of a surprise. But a little bit like Manuel Gonzalez, Neil, you can make that transition from 300s to Supersports and then do a good job in the Moto2 class. So Huertas could potentially be there next year.
Yeah, it could be interesting. Eh? Yeah, it looks as though that team's partnership with Dennis Foggia will be ending. So I know Italtrans always likes to have an Italian rider in its midst. And Huertas, I guess, fits the bill in some respects. He's been pretty impressive, right? He's his second year in Supersport and he's already looking as though he's the champion-elect. Or is it his third year, Steve?
Third year, yeah.
Sorry.
For him, he stepped up after winning the 300 championship, which would have been in 21, and then 2 years on a Kawasaki, 1 year on the Ducati, and this year he's been really impressive. So it would be good for our championship if we were able to see him make that transition as well. But we'll wait and see what happens for that. One thing that probably a little bit like the Alonso news, Neil, wasn't a big surprise was our Patreon rider of the weekend in Aragon vote. It ended up being 84% Marc Marquez. So no big surprise on that. And no big surprise as well to see that the big talking point on Patreon was the Pecco Bagnaia and Alex Marquez crash and the outcome from that. We asked everyone for their opinions on it, and it was pretty much across the board. People saw it as a racing incident, and Jim Smith came in straight away and said, bang on, racing incident, and nothing else to say about it. We had Grumpy Grizz came in and said, yeah, it's a racing incident, but I think it's one of those things where Bagnaia, with so much more to lose, there was no need to put himself in that position, which I think was very similar to what you said on the podcast, Dave, about patience being the most important thing. Kids at the Table said that one of the big things for it was you'd put more of the blame onto Pecco, even if it is a racing incident, but they would have lost respect for Marquez if he had backed out of it as well. So I think that's, again, similar to what quite a few riders had to say about it as well. Jerry Carlson said that Pecco was being overly aggressive and tried to make the move too quickly, and he could have waited. So, Dave, just in light of those comments, have you had any change of heart after looking at the incident again over the last few days?
No, I mean, I think it was inevitable. I mean, they're both to blame. I think they're both equally to blame. They both should have done something, but also I think it would have been much, for both of them, it was difficult to avoid just because the track was so dirty. Like I said on the pod on Sunday, I think this is one weekend where this is one call the FIM stewards got absolutely spot on. There's no point in trying to blame someone for something. I don't think it particularly was, but I think it was. I mean, the point about it is, and I said this on the pod as well, is Pecco had a lot to lose, and he threw away a lot of points by trying to force the issue. If you've got nothing to lose, then sure, you do it, and maybe on a different track you'd be able to pull it off as well. But he had easily caught Alex Marquez. He had plenty of time to get past him. He could have just waited another few. I think he still had 5 or 6 laps left to go. And he threw away a lot of points.
Yeah, I think for me it's one of those ones where I definitely viewed it as a racing incident. I also found it quite funny whenever you had people talking about the highway code coming into the racetrack and merging and looking over shoulders and making sure that you're not blocking anyone. Marquez didn't run off the track. He ran onto the curb, lost his momentum. He stuck to the inside line. If you're on the inside, you've got nowhere to go. Pecco's the one that knows where everyone is in that situation. He didn't need to make the move when he did and just rushed into it a little bit too much. But Neil, I'm going to come to you for our first question from one of our patrons. It was Janice Clayton that was asking about Pecco and his insinuations that Alex did this on purpose and crashed into him on purpose. What would Alex actually gain from crashing into Pecco? And also, there was the inference then that Marc would gain something from it. So what did the Marquez brothers have to gain if Alex did this?
Well, if you wanted to put on a tin hat and delve deep into the conspiracy theory barrel, I guess you could come to the conclusion that Pecco Bagnaia is Valentino Rossi's protege and Marc Marquez is a sworn enemy of the number 46. And Alex is Marc's brother. So, you do the math. I think Pecco made that insinuation because he was just furious. He was so angry at what had happened. I'm pretty sure that when we speak to him again on the Thursday at Misano, he's not going to peddle that line again. In fact, we were told by...
I hope he doubles down on it, to be honest, Neil.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I hope he does as well, and
he takes out the data, and he just says at the end of the press conference in Italian, look at this, look at this.
Yeah, I hope he brings out the Sector Times as well, produces like a couple of sheets of paper. Like, look, he was this fast on this lap and not as fast on this one. But yeah, I think it all came just from the fact that he was slightly injured. He said there was some issues with his neck that he doesn't think is going to be an issue this weekend, but it's far from an ideal situation. He also just watched his main championship rival take another 20 points out of him in the championship race. And yeah, Alex would have nothing to gain from doing this because podium was still on the table for him. If you wanted to dream up some ridiculous conspiracy that Alex was working in tandem with his brother Marc to try and get Marc back into the championship race, then I'm sorry, but you're in cuckoo land, to borrow a Roy Keane expression. So I think I agree with Dave and I agree with yourself, Steve. I think both of them were to blame. I rewatched the incident a couple of times before we just came on and started recording. I think both needed to be more aware of where the other one is. When Alex made that mistake, for him to commit to the corner without really checking where Bagnaia was is maybe a little bit naive. Also, when you look at the mid-corner on the replay and slow it down, I mean, Pecco was pretty much on course with his trajectory to touch the inside apex white line at turn 13, which was, I mean, that's not giving Alex any room whatsoever. And, I timed it as well. From the moment that Alex ran wide to when they came together and collided was, I think, about 2.4 seconds. So, we're talking and we're micro-analyzing an issue or an incident that happened in almost the blinking of an eye, So, I think both were at fault and both have their own arguments and both have reason, I think, to be a bit pissed off at the other. And in that case, you have to say, race an incident.
Yeah, the other thing is, like, if Alex is really trying to help his brother in the championship, then he should have taken out Jorge Martin rather than Pecco Bagnaia. But I mean, it was just one of those things. Like you say, 2.4 seconds. Things happen very, very quickly, and you're moving at very, very high speed. And once you made a decision, then pretty much physics means that your decision is going to run its course. So there was not a lot they can do. The whole data thing, because Pecco did sort of like say, I saw the data and he was accelerating. Well, of course he was accelerating. He just had to cut his throttle to keep the bike back on track. So he starts accelerating again to pick the speed up. But that's before Pecco actually arrives. So things are just happening too much too quickly.
Yeah, I was asking one rider about this in the past, and they said that their analogy was basically, you think about when you're on the motorway and you're doing 75, 80, 90 mile an hour, whatever it's going to be, and everything's very slow until someone cuts you off, and then suddenly, whoa, you have to react to it instantly because it was unexpected. These incidents, when you're on the bike, everything's flowing, it's easy, 1.5 minutes for a lap, 140 for a lap. It seems like it takes 10 minutes because you're so in tune with where everything has to be. Whereas when something goes wrong, all that time speeds up and suddenly that 2.4 seconds goes by like that. And that's the big challenge for a lot of the riders as well. Personally, I think you can have racing incidents where we're conditioned to think someone has to be to blame. But guess what? That's racing. And motorbike racing, for all we want to believe, it's one of the biggest contact sports in the world. And it's a sport of pure intimidation. And if you're Alex Marquez and you back out of that, Pecco Bagnaia knows full well you're never going to be in a fight with him again. So that's where for Marquez it's important to make sure that you stand your ground as well. And I think that's one of the big things from it. David, just a second part of Janice's question. It was about Pecco's mindset as well. And she says that everything she's ever heard about Pecco is that he's not arrogant. He has, a lot of respect. He's an intelligent guy. But why does he blame everyone else for his mistakes? The track was the issue for the low grip, which is fair enough. The tires were then the problem. Marquez opened the throttle and caused the crash. All these things seem to happen very quickly in his debriefs at the end of the weekend, where he just did his best to apportion as much blame as possible on everyone bar himself.
I think it's because we get to speak to him sort of, within a couple of hours of it happening, and before he's had a chance to sort of like sit down, calm himself down and think about it and analyse it more more calmly and more coolly. I think his problem is Pecco Bagnaia's biggest problem is that when he gets upset, once he gets riled, he can lose patience. I think that's going to be a big problem for him next year. Once in a battle with Marc, because Marc knows how to exploit that. He knows how to rile people up and get them to make mistakes. So, I mean, he says these things because because he hasn't had a chance to sit down and think about it. He is quite an emotional person. He looks very, very calm, but he's much more emotional than he lets on. And I think that's why he says these things. And then because I've talked to people around him about certain incidents, and then a little bit later you will hear from them that no, well, he sort of understood that was, he made the mistake there. So it's just a coping mechanism basically, spread the blame around at the time and then go back afterwards and sort it all out and sort it all out in his own mind later on.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Neil, we have another question in about this as well, and it comes down to the FIM stewarding, and not really about the decision that was made for this one, but the fact that Simon Crafar was very much of the opinion that Alex Marquez was to blame about this. And TV Room Raccoon was asking about the fact that online they see a lot of times where fans consider Simon to be very biased against the Marquez brothers, and then just is there any truth to that? And then how fair a steward do you expect Simon to be for next year? Obviously, we all know Simon very well, so I think it's a good opportunity to be able to talk about his role for next year.
I think people may have the impression that Simon's biased against Marc, because I think Marc does one thing in particular that Simon really disagrees with, and that is basically looking for a toe from other riders. Maybe not so much this year, although there have been certain examples. Certainly the last couple of years with Honda, and Simon, I think, has spoken about it quite a few times, that when a rider looks over the shoulder at someone following them and kind of tells them to get lost, then that, in Simon's day, that was the sort of the moment to say, okay, this guy's telling me to leave, or to leave him alone. I'll go away and do my own lap time, or I'll find another victim. But the fact that Marc would persist with that kind of thing, I think was something that riled up, or not riled up, but would sort of, Simon disagreed with. And he's spoken about how he would maybe like to see that put an end to when he becomes the chief steward next year. So I think that's maybe what the people on the internet have in mind when they mention that Simon's biased against Marc, because he does speak out about that kind of thing. I mean, Simon's a smart guy, so I expect him to be a scrupulously fair steward. He's not stupid. He knows that he can't have biases next year. It's going to be a thankless job, because there's a lot, Simon knows a lot of the riders quite well. A lot of them, live up in Andorra, quite close to where he lives. And it's a tough task to basically have to look some of them in the eye and say, like, look, you were wrong and I'm giving you this penalty. But, he's aware of that, and he was aware of that when he took on the position. So, I expect him to be a fair steward.
Yeah, I mean, it's also more difficult for Simon Crowfowl because he is on social media. People know him. People have interacted with him. They've developed a parasocial relationship with him, where they think they think they know him. He's much more in the public eye than Freddie Spencer is or was. I mean, Freddie Spencer was an ex-rider who would sort of pass by the periphery of most MotoGP fans' sort of consciousness every now and again, but never really. I mean, you never felt like there was a way to interact with Freddie Spencer, whereas people feel a much more direct connection to Simon Crowfowl. And as for whether he can be scrupulously fair, I have been fortunate to talk to some people who were in a position to make decisions about things. And to have private conversations where they're expressing their private opinions. And I know for a fact that their private opinions on certain riders are completely not apparent whatsoever in terms of their decisions. I've heard their opinion on, shall we say, Rider A, and then Rider A has been has done something, and there's been and that opinion on Rider A has not been at all apparent. And I think this is true throughout the paddock. You can't let your even as a team manager, as a steward in race direction, as senior Dorna staff, as like I say, as a team manager or a mechanic or whatever, a crew chief, you cannot let your opinion of a rider get in the way of doing your job, doing a good job, because it's too important to let petty rivalries get away with it. So I have no concerns at all about Simon being, whatever his opinion of Marc Marquez. Also, he's a commentator now. Like it is literally his job to express an opinion, which is just an opinion, which is very different to when you're in a role to actually make a decision on someone's behaviour. So I have no concerns at all about Crowfowl not being fair.
And it's one of those situations as well, Dave, where you have to be able to justify the decisions that you've made. And then that's there for the public record as well. So any bias is made clear very quickly in a situation like that. We've some questions in about the track conditions. And obviously during the course of the podcast, you were both mentioning the fact that just how dirty the track was, and that played into the strengths for Marquez this weekend. We had a question from Craig Stanion, Dave, about whether or not Dorna should take responsibility for the track conditions as the organisers of the event. We heard so many times through the course of the weekend, riders talking about the safety issues, obviously Pecco at the start and different situations like that. Was this a situation where Dorna should have had track sweepers and different equipment available to try and get the track ready in time? Obviously, it was one of those perfect storm situations as well, which can happen. We saw it in Argentina for superbikes. We've seen it in Qatar in the past. We've seen it plenty of different tracks.
Yeah, no, I mean, this happens all the time. It's not Dorna's. So you have this fairly complicated legal situation where the contract between the promoter and Dorna sets out very clearly who is responsible for what. So the track is responsible for, or the circuit is responsible for the track. Put it that way, or the event organizer is responsible for the track, and the event organizer, because sometimes the event organizer isn't the circuit. But anyway, basically the people who run who own the track and run the track are the people who are responsible for track conditions. Now, Dorna have a very strong role to play in that. They can force them to clean the track and all the rest of it. So, on which they do, which there's been, they have an active role. We saw on Saturday night that they were out there cleaning the grid. But there are limits. If you have a new surface, really you should let the surface bed in longer before you have a race. But again, you don't always have the luxury of being able to leave the track for long enough for it to actually settle and mature. And just like the conditions, the location of the track, Aragon is in the middle of a very dry and dusty area. It's very arid. There's a lot of dust in the air, and then to have lots of like severely torrential rain chucking dirt onto the track overnight. This not a lot you can do about that. I mean, this happens all the time. Like the dirt can wash off the hillsides into the track, or there can just be a lot of dust in the air because it's been hot and dry for a long time. And when a rain falls, the rain literally just sucks the dust out of the air and dumps it on the track. So there are very limited things that circuits can do. Some circuits have various cleaning solutions. They have ways of sweeping it. But the other thing is, if you start sweeping the track and cleaning the track, then you take the rubber off as well. And so you get very poor grip again because the track isn't rubbered in. So the biggest problem is that this is an outdoor sport. And we are not, you do not have the climate under control. So these are all circumstances that you can't control, and these things are going to happen.
Yeah, you don't have the climate under control, and I'm not sure if anyone can hear the thunder in the background here, but I certainly don't have the climate under control here in Ireland at the minute. Neil, just to move on to Mark as well, one of the questions we had in was from Jonathan Caldwell, and Jonathan was asking, has or will Ducati provide any updates to the GP23 for Mark between now and the end of the season, just in order to help him to take some points off Jorge Martin and make sure that the number one plate's on the factory bike next year?
It's an interesting question. Is the guy from the third Ducati satellite team going to get updates to deprive the guy from the official Ducati satellite team on the latest machinery win the championship? But yeah, I think it's a valid question because obviously, Ducati will want the number one plate to be in their garage next year. With regards to the updates that they could provide, it's an interesting one. Mark has been speaking quite a lot recently about how the ride height device in the GP24 is notably better than the one that he's using currently, and you kind of feel that he's repeating that with an eye on potentially getting that brought into his box. So potentially that could be something that comes his way, especially now he's proved himself to be capable of winning a race on the GP23. It's a really interesting dynamic on how they're going to manage it. You could even argue that Mark is still in the championship fight as well. So it wouldn't just be to deprive Jorge; it could be to potentially allow Mark to come back into the fight too.
Yeah, I mean, the ride height device is a big thing. It was my understanding they were thinking about testing it at the Mugello test, but they didn't get a chance to test it because, again, we talked about not having the weather under control. It just rained all day, so there was nowhere they could test. It might be something that turns up at the Misano test that Marc gets a go. There's a risk for Ducati. Yes, they could give Marc something which might help him take points off of Jorge Martin, but he might also take points off of Pecco Bagnaia. So there's no it's sort of, it really is playing a wild card rather than actually a targeted attack on one rider or another. If you see what I mean, it's not. There's no guarantee that this is going to play out in the way that Ducati management sort of would hope they were. So I think it's going to end up being a completely different calculation.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see what happens there. And like you said, Dave, if they end up getting that updated ride height device, it would make a big difference. Just one question we just got in from Paul Lostia as well, Dave, was about Marc's relationship with his crew chief, Frankie Cartetti. And the question was, based on the TV body language, it always seems a little bit standoffish between those two.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you're comparing it to his body language with Santi Hernandez, for whom he spent, how long did he work with Santi Hernandez? 12, 14 years, something like that. Such a long time. It's completely incomparable. Also so what he's been through an awful lot with. As far as I could tell, the pair of them have a good relationship. It's not, it's not the kind of relationship he had with Santi Hernandez. It's not, it's not a deep friendship, that sort of thing. These sort of things take time to develop, and also Marc knows that this is just a temporary thing. It's up until the end of the year, and then he gets a new crew chief when he goes to the factory team next year. So you have to invest energy into your relationship with your crew chief, but you don't want to invest everything in it unless you really genuinely hit it off just incredibly well. But I mean, you don't have to be best friends with your crew chief. You just have to have faith in them, have confidence in them, have belief in them, believe that they know what they're doing. And I mean, you do get the sense that Marc trusts his crew and knows that his crew are doing everything that they can to help him succeed. But are they going to be godparents to each other's children? Who knows? I'm not sure that's particularly relevant here.
Neil, obviously enough, you don't have to get along with your fellow podcasters, but do you have the trust and faith in them that they're going to do the job?
No comment.
No
Absolutely
comment.
No comment.
Strong no comment on that, please. Neil, we had a question in from Scott Rowe as well about Marc not overly celebrating his win on Sunday. Obviously, the slowdown lap was full of energy and emotion, but by the time he got onto the podium, it was almost as if this was just a job that had to be done, and now he's on to the next target. And it's almost like that relief of winning, and then immediately it's like, well, that's what I've always expected. I'm always going to win races.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think Marc was celebrating it like he had just won a world championship. I think it was more relief really than anything, because he did seem quite stressed out on Friday and Saturday by the fact that he knew in his head that he was the guy with the strongest pace. He was the guy who was not just faster than everyone else, but considerably faster than everyone else. And really the only person that could stop Marc winning on Sunday was Marc himself. And the fact that he had a couple of situations like this year and it didn't come out in his favor, I think, he was very aware of that. So I feel that there was a kind of more of a sense of relief rather than an outpouring of total joy. And yeah, I think he has to think that he's still somewhat in the championship, even if it's just kind of looking in from the outside. I'm not, by no means I'm saying that Marc is a favourite, and I expect him to take the title in Valencia, but he's 70 points back. He's 70 points back of Jorge Martin, who is still an unknown quantity to an extent when he is the one that is being chased with, a race or two to go. He's been, generally speaking, towards the end of last year, Martin was the guy that was doing the chasing. He's 47 points back of Pecco Bagnaia. That's not an insurmountable gap with 8 rounds still to go. So yeah, I can understand. And you look at the races that remain. Phillip Island and Valencia are anti-clockwise tracks, so you'll expect Mark to go very well there. Indonesia and Thailand, to name two tracks, are ones where usually very dirty and track condition can be a real issue, similar to what we saw at Aragon. So, by the logic of what we just witnessed, Mark could be a challenger there as well. And then we've got places like Malaysia, Japan, where you could feasibly have wet races, and we know Mark's expertise in the rain. So, yeah, Mark obviously backs himself to the hilt, and I think what was interesting at the weekend was he said that it wasn't just Aragon. He knew the conditions in Aragon were special and suited him in particular, but this kind of followed on from Austria, where he felt that he had a pace that could maybe fight with Bagnaia at a track where he shouldn't really have been up there. So, he seems to have really hit optimum stride at the moment and has that kind of feeling now where, he can fight with him consistently.
Yeah, I wrote about Mark's response to winning yesterday last night. And one of the things that Mark said, because there was a lot of emotion there wasn't a lot of energy there, but there was a lot of emotion there. And as Neil said, it was a release more than anything else. It was just a release of all of this stress that had been built up over, for the past, 3.5, 4 years. Can I do it again? Was this the right decision? Did I make the right choice to jump on the Gresini Ducati? He's proved that to himself. I think he is thinking about the championship, but he's not thinking necessarily about the 2024 championship. What he is thinking about is all of this is just building into making a proper 2024 championship launching a proper attack on the championship in 2025. So he's just learning. He's still being a sponge, trying to figure out, put all of the pieces together to be ready right from the beginning, right from the first race in Buriram in 2025.
We had a question from Joe Mueller as well, Neil, and it was about the jump from going from the GP23 to the GP25 and whether or not other riders had made this kind of transition successfully, moving through two generations of the Ducati. Obviously, Enea Bastianini's done it twice. He went from the GP19 to the 21, from the 21 to the 23. But Joe's saying that he obviously thinks Mark has the talent to make that transition, but will it make it a little bit more difficult for him to get on par with Pecco right from the get-go?
Probably not. I don't think. I can't see it, to be honest. I think if he was able to move across from a Honda to a bike like the Ducati and be fairly competitive within 3 rounds, I think the step up from GP23 to GP25 next year shouldn't take him too long. I really don't think so.
Cool.
And the GP25 is not going to be that much difference to the GP24. The bigger step is going to be between the 23 and the 24. So.
Just to finish up our questions from patrons as well, we've got a couple of Jorge Martin questions as well. And Rudy was saying that it was probably overshadowed a bit by Mark's win and the Pecco crash, but just how good was Jorge Martin at the weekend? There was a massive margin between him and the other riders in that race. He was super impressive. He did the right thing of being able just to make sure he finished second both times. And Rudy's more convinced than ever that Jorge Martin's going to win the championship.
I was super impressed with Jorge at the weekend. I think he did everything absolutely right. He maximised exactly what he could have done, and how he recovered from a really difficult moment in qualifying was really impressive. So, top hats off for that. Is he the favourite for the championship? Technically he should be. He's 23 points clear. And that's a decent advantage, but we're going to Misano doubleheader where Pecco is super strong. And I don't know, for me, Jorge's still untested, leading the championship with a decent margin going into the final couple of races. As I mentioned before, he's usually the pursuer, and he's untested in the kind of MotoGP championship fight of being able to get it done. You could say that he had it well within his hands to win it last year. He conspired on a couple of occasions to really be his own worst enemy, crashing or making silly tire decisions, as we saw in Indonesia and Phillip Island last year, and then launching it in Valencia when he was there fighting with Bagnaia. Bagnaia is he's a known quantity in those kind of in those kind of weekends where your blood has to run absolutely cold. He's done it 3 times in his life. He's done it twice in MotoGP and high pressure stakes in the last 2 years. So yeah, I think unless Jorge's lead mushrooms up to 60 points, no, I still don't quite count him as the favourite. I still think Pecco. You go with what you know, and what we've seen from Pecco in the last 2 years is he knows what to do in those situations.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where you are what you are until you make that change, and it's up for Martin to make sure that he can get it across the line. Dave, just one last question, and it was about Aprilia, and how can they overcome problems like they had at the weekend, and for Jorge Martin next year, for Bezzecchi joining? Is there any way that at certain rounds next year they won't just be cannon fodder like the Aprilia seem to be this weekend?
No, I mean, it's very possible that they will just become cannon fodder. It was peculiar. And what seems to be the problem, sort of talking to the riders, is that the bike has a particular performance window, and there are certain times where you just can't get the load into the tyres to actually make them work, on low grip. If there's low grip, but you can still load the tyre, it'll work. But like this, whether there's low grip and you're just sliding, you're just going to go really, really slow. So I think it's going to be, I think it is going to be difficult sometimes next year. And I think it's a fundamental weakness of the Aprilia. The Aprilia has been designed also more about carrying corner speed. And when you rely about, carrying a lot of speed into the corner on the edge of the tyre, then when the grip goes away, you're in trouble. You have to find a different way to actually fight to find the speeds, to find the lap time, and that's going to be tricky for them. So yeah, it was one of the more interesting races from that perspective, and it was very bad news from Aprilia. But I think it will actually prove to be one of the most, in the long run, it'll be one of the most productive races, one of the most instructive races for Aprilia, because there was so much for them to learn.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this historically with Aprilia in wet conditions. I think Maverick Vinales has referenced the kind of tricky half-and-half conditions we had the Spanish Grand Prix in qualifying last year, and the Aprilia just could not get any performance from the tyres. It couldn't feel any sort of grip whatsoever. And, Aleix was saying through the race, he was pretty much doing 1:50s, and that was Alonso Lopez's fastest time. Those are Moto2 times from Friday afternoon when, the track was in decent condition. So he just said it was completely embarrassing. But it's a tricky one, and it does seem that the kind of the operating window is even narrower than it has been in previous years. Because it used to be a bike that when you went to somewhere like Argentina or even Indonesia last year, I know Aleix made a mess of the Indonesian Grand Prix last year, but dirty track, low grip. Yet the Aprilias were the fastest bikes pretty much right the way through practice, and should have been maybe fighting for victory. And it's strange how it's kind of gone so totally 180 almost. So a lot of questions in the Wally, you would say, over the coming days.
Yeah, and we're going to finish off today's podcast with a little bit of a preview to Misano and the San Marino Grand Prix. And this is going to be the 30th Grand Prix in Misano as well. So I'm going to ask you both for a couple of specific memories. Obviously, David, you being the contrarian that likes to go to the dentist, I presume your favourite Misano race was 1989 when Frankie Keeley won in the midst of all the protests for all the other riders.
No, I think my favourite Misano race was was it the first time they went back or the second time they went back, where there was a rainstorm and the track was flooded, and there's a fabulous photo of a track marshal standing up to his waist in the water. I think maybe in Quercia, one of the corners. But yeah, yes, the Frankie Keeley win was just. As a loyal Union man of 40 years, I would say no to Scabs.
Yeah, and bonus points. Who else was on the podium that day? That is a tough question.
Buckmaster was on the podium.
But Buckmaster's the only one that I know.
The other one was Rudroff.
Michael Rudroff. Yeah, well done.
There you go. I've passed Neil's test. Neil, obviously for you, your favorite one will be Andrea Dovizioso winning at home, surely.
Yeah, that was what, 2018. I guess it wasn't a great race, was it?
It was
I
for
mean,
your favourite rider, though, Neil, and that's all that matters.
it was, yeah. Victory at home as well. So that was a good one, yeah. Yeah, brilliant races have been few and far between at Misano, I guess you have to say, in recent years. I mean, 2 years ago was pretty fun race. Bastianini constantly on Pecco's back for the entirety. That was pretty good. A couple of decent races during the COVID season as well in 2020, with Tranmere, with a couple of great comebacks. I particularly enjoyed, I think it was the first race in 2020 when Rossi was fighting with Bagnaia, Morbidelli, and there was one other Academy member up there. And I think he said afterwards, while he was fighting them, he just missed out on the podium. I think Mir got him on the last lap. And he said on the kind of slowdown lap, he was thinking, whose fucking idea was it to train these riders and start the academy? Which I thought was a pretty good line. So yeah, those ones stand out. Also, going way back in the day, I did enjoy Randy Mamola's kind of seismic save, from high siding on the old layout, which went the opposite direction to the current one. High siding out of what is now the front of the back straight, I think it was, and managing to run the bike to a standstill in the grass. I mean, I remember seeing that when I was about 4 or 5 years old. Just thought like, wow, and still have that reaction now, to be honest.
Yeah, that'd be enough to make you a 500 GP fan, Neil, from the outset. And I think for me, one of my favourite memories of Misano was being there in 2014 when Rossi won, because at that moment you've always felt like you were at the last Rossi win, and I've witnessed something special here. And it was very quickly shifted whenever he won at Phillip Island, I think at the end of that season, to maybe something's going to happen for Rossi again. And then obviously 2015 he was able to win those races at the start of the year, and it kind of shifted to maybe winning the championship. But back in I didn't mention anything about that. I didn't mention anything about that. But that win in Misano was one of those moments where the whole paddock seemed to come out into pit lane to see him, and everyone thought it was something special, which was obviously pretty cool to be a part of as well.
Yeah, and that 2015 race was pretty cool, actually. Just come to think of it, that was
there was a
flag
shower.
to flag. Yeah, which Marquez won, obviously, and Lorenzo crashed out, and Bradley Smith was second because he stayed on and did,
and Scott was on the podium as well, I think, as well.
That's right, yeah.
No, Brad, it was such a fantastic ride by Bradley Smith. Just like staying out too late to come back in for wets, stayed out on slicks, tracked right out again, and it came back to him. So, I mean, he sort of semi-lucked into it, but it was an outstanding ride. And again, so much drama in that race with Lorenzo coming out. Trying to stay with Rossi, maybe, I think, when he came out and realizing, this is not happening, and crashing out. So yeah, lots to enjoy in that race.
Yeah, I think that for me, that was one of the easiest weekends I ever had for my MCN copy. 2 British riders on a Premier Class podium. Everything wrote itself. I think I was finished by about 5:00. But actually, just to go back to 2014 as well, one of my favourite Misano memories was all of us being out for dinner on the Sunday night, and Redding had just, it hadn't been announced yet, but I just found out that he was switching to Mark VDS for the following year from Grassini on that open Honda. And we were all out for dinner and talking about it, and guys at the table next to us were there like, where'd you hear that? And we were just saying, that's just what's going to happen. And they went to crash.net, and it was myself and Pete McLaren sitting at the dinner table, and they were there, no, couldn't be the case yet. It's not up on Crash yet. Pete McLaren hasn't written it yet. And I was there like, that's because Pete's right here, mate. So for me, that was one of my highlights. Your man actually offered to pay for our dinner as well, which was far too generous, but we'd never look past a free meal. But for this weekend then, Neil, what are we expecting? The weather looks like it's going to be obviously typical early September in Misano, where it's going to be baking hot, and then the threat of a storm at any moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're saying this every week on the podcast when we're previewing a race, but it's hard to look past the 3 GP24s. Bagnaia, this is his track. It's also in Bastianini's track. Got his first ever Grand Prix victory here back in 2015 in the Moto3 class. And as I just mentioned, it was a real pain in Bagnaia's backside right the way through the 22 race. Didn't he get his first MotoGP podium here actually as well in 21? So yeah, this is a great track for Bastia. Again, so much of it will come down to Saturday and whether he can get a decent grid position, something he completely failed to do in Aragon, frustratingly so, because he had the pace to maybe fight with Martin in the race, but, qualified back in 14th. You're not going to win championships that way for sure. And then, I guess you have to look at, Martin, the double winner last year, still holds that as probably his favourite victory because it was in typical Martin style, him succeeding in, the great enemy's backyard. And I think you have to say those three. And then just because of what we've seen the last 2 weekends, you wouldn't rule Marquez out either. But I really can't fathom anyone else getting close to those guys. Bezzecchi was on the podium twice last year, but his form is so far away from what it was that I think, pick one of those four names possibly.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Dave, what about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard to disagree, really. The layout of the track is going to favour the GP24s because there are places where they can use that ride high device, which gives them the advantage. There's a lot of grip on the track, and that's going to help with the GP24s because the GP24 really knows how to use the grip from that new rear Michelin. I mean, you would expect the Aprilia to be able to go fast there as well. Precisely because there will be grip, there'll be usable grip, and there'll be the grip they know how to use. Obviously, Savadori tests there a lot, so they've got lots and lots of data. But perhaps the biggest advantage is just the fact that there's a bunch of VR46 Academy riders on Ducatis, and they know that track like the back of their hand. They literally have thousands of laps around there, so you would have to put there. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I think Digia is still too injured, but you feel that Digia could be close to something. Maybe Misano too. We'll see him, come and do something a little bit special on Misano too. But I should be keeping a little bit of an eye out for him on that. So and then there are some biggish things coming at the test on Monday as well, which I should be fascinated to see. I don't think we'll see big things from Ducati, but certainly from Yamaha and Honda, we'll both have some fairly major developments. So let's see what that brings.
Yeah, and Neil, obviously, David mentioned about Aprilia potentially having a stronger weekend, obviously, than what they had in Aragon. This is where we could see Vinales do something as well. He's got 4 poles here in Misano in the past. And obviously, he's just so up and down that this could be the weekend where my faith in him for the Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League actually pays off.
I don't know, Steve. I mean,
I don't know either, Neil. I'm in too deep with the man now.
Yeah, he hasn't managed to score more than 9 points across a full weekend since Assen. So he's been really bad. He's due it, exactly. But he's in a terrible run of form. And yeah, part of me thinks that maybe Vinales' head is just slumped ever so slightly as well. Because, the Aprilias were bad in Aragon, but he was by far the worst of the three. The worst of the four. We mentioned it on Sunday's show, 37 seconds off after the sprint. It doesn't. I don't think it sets him up for a heroic kind of farewell podium to Aprilia this weekend, if I'm being honest. Yeah,
I think when Adam was talking about him as a midfield dynamo, he was talking about him in footballing terms rather than his on-track performance. But what about for KTM this weekend then, Dave, as well? Obviously, Binder back to a bit more like the form you'd expect last time out in Aragon. Pedro Acosta with podiums in both the sprint and the longer Grand Prix as well.
I shall defer to Neil on how Pedro Acosta did around Aragon on Moto2 and Moto3, but the track should suit KTM much better. Obviously, Binder was on the podium here last year. It's more of a stop. I just looked at the results and I thought that's what the MotoGP.com website was saying.
I don't think so. I think it was Martin, Bezzecchi, and Pecco in the 2 races. No.
Oh right, I take it back, but
definitely in the Grand Prix it was Bezzecchi and Pecco. It was an all Ducati podium. Remember that?
In which case I take it back. I've been lied to by the MotoGP.com website. But I mean, the layout of the track should suit the KTM's better. It's more of a stop and go track. There are places where they can actually brake, where they can stop the bike and pick it up. The final corner out of turn, what is it, 6, turn 8. There's a bunch of places where the KTM should be able to do a little bit better. I suspect that they are going. That KTM is going to be closer again, and coming off a pretty strong weekend in Aragon, that's got to give them some confidence going in there.
I was just trying to have a little look back, Dave, to see what the story was for Binder last year, because obviously I can't remember it off the top of my head. Can't find anything there, so can offer no insight in that at all. Neil, just before we wrap it all up, obviously we're going to have a lot of content on Patreon over the course of this weekend. Why don't you tell everyone what we're going to be doing?
Well, we are going to have our usual Paddock No Show, Steves, at the end of every day of Grand Prix racing. That's Thursday right the way through to Saturday. Then we have our reaction show on Sunday. We're going to have, I think it's 3 extra interviews if you're a Paddock insider, as well as the Paddock Note shows every month, which is definitely worthwhile. So those are going to be interviews, exclusive interviews that we get from the MotoGP Paddock, you get from the Superbike Paddock, and as well as that, you have access to Discord. You can ask us questions that we have answered on shows like today, and also there's a fantastic competition which you really should enter if you love your MotoGP, because there are 2 Paddock passes going for a round later in the season. I think it's from the Japanese Grand Prix onwards, a round of your choice. So that could be one of the overseas races, excluding Indonesia or Valencia. These are not for sale, these Paddock passes. And yeah, you could get your hands on 2 of them, which would be fantastic. And all you have to do is sign up to become a Paddock Insider on our Patreon page. So that's patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. And I think it's a sensational prize. Anyone that is already a Paddock Insider is automatically entered into the draw, I should say, as well. So head over there and sign up for, I think it's $10 a month, and you get all this fantastic content. You get access to our Discord channel. You can interact with us right the way through the weekend, and lots of bonuses, I think.
Yeah, I think $10 a month for the opportunity to call me an idiot is money well spent, wouldn't you say?
And there are quite a few that do, Dave, which I fully can get behind.
Exactly. Yeah.
For that competition, it is worth noting as well that it's for the annual Paddock Insiders. You have to sign up for the year. I think it works out at $108. You get a bit of a discount for it if you sign up for the year. $108 would be €99. It's £80. So whatever else in different currencies. But great value to be able to enter a draw for, like Neil said, a prize that money can't buy. And I think that's what makes it a little bit special. And again, gives an indication of just what we're trying to do with our Patreon as well. So check out patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. And as ever, we're going to be busy all the way through the weekend with our Paddock Notes shows. And once again, just from all of us, a big thank you to everyone that supports us on Patreon, as well as Renthal Street Fly Racing and KTM for supporting the Paddock Pass podcast.